Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out today. I really appreciate folks who are present here. And we on this particular talk is going to be, I think, going to be quite interesting and engaging. I am David Mitchell. I'm the director of the Michael A. Middleton Center for Race, Citizenship and Justice. Our associate director, Ruth L. is up here in the front row, and our administrative support person, Kate Kelly, is here. I'm going to introduce some other famous people in the room in a moment. Actually, talk about the center. So the Michael A. Middleton Center for Race, Citizenship, and Justice was an idea that was forged amidst the protest events on 2015 on our campus. And it's quite fitting that we're talking about race, Black athletes, and resistance today, given that particular moment in time, if you will. A multidisciplinary, diverse collection of faculty and staff came together to address a critical moment in our university's history. The mission of this center is to promote excellence in the multidisciplinary study of race, citizenship, and justice, gather and analyze historical and contemporary knowledge, and foster dialogue and engagement across a variety of internal and external participants. The center supports scholars that engage in theoretical and applied research aimed at making a meaningful impact on communities affected by disparities in education, health, and economic opportunities, and to celebrate the human dignity of people in those communities. The center brings together a community of scholars to provide commentary, a variety of perspectives, and ideas related to the three research pillars of race, citizenship, and justice. This intentional level of engagement reflects a rich spectrum of discourses and provides space to evolve as a university, as a community, and as a society. The center's responsibility is to ensure that the engagement around the three research pillars is conducted in the spirit of the university's values, and also contributes directly to at least three of the strategic goals of the University of Missouri: research and creative works, engagement and outreach, and inclusive excellence. The center seeks to reinforce the character of the University of Missouri as an institution of higher learning that values respect, responsibility, discovery, and excellence, all with a view to promote social advancement. Our responsibility is to ensure that racial equity and justice becomes integral parts of university life. The center is named for Michael A. Middleton, who joins us here today. Michael Middleton is a two-time graduate of MU with degrees from the College of Arts and Science and the School of Law, and his 50-year relationship with the University of Missouri spanned experiences as student, alumnus, faculty, administrator, and the Mizzou System Interim President. He's also served as the Interim President of Lincoln University, quite a distinguished record for any one of us. We all hope to be Mike when we grow up. He also spent time as a civil rights attorney through his Mizzou years. He was active in fighting for the rights of Black students and was instrumental in the development of Black studies. His career has focused on building bridges between people and their ideas, all with a view to driving to a more unified and just future. I would, of course, also be remiss if I did not introduce his partner in all of these endeavors, because no one can do a 50-year career without some question. In her own right, is a distinguished graduate of this institution, a two-time graduate of MU with a BS degree in elementary education, an educational specialist degree in educational administration, PhD in educational administration from the University of Missouri. And she too has served a number of roles at Mizzou, of course, serving also as the First Lady of Mizzou in Mike's role as the interim president. And we appreciate both of them. Thank you very much. In a moment, I will introduce our panelists for our discussion. It's going to be a discussion, a conversation, not a panel presentation. So today, the Middleton Center presents the topic, "We're Not Playing Anymore: Athletes and Resistance." For years now, we have heard that individuals who represent African Americans, who are on the playing fields, on the basketball courts, who swing a tennis racket or a golf club, they are told to just shut up and dribble, just shut up and pass, just swing the golf club and be quiet. That their identity as athletes is all that matters. And in effect, it erases the intersectionality of who they are. That for somehow class seems to eclipse the fact that they are Black and Black in America. And what does resistance mean in this context? It means protest for some. It means challenging rules with respect to oppression, such as name, image, and likeness. It means identifying, in effect, issues and speaking out and having a voice and using your platform, a phrase that has become quite popular recently, on how to impact change. They have a great platform. There are a number of images that you can probably pick out through time that identify, if you will, iconic images of Black athletes and resistance. There's the iconic Tommy Smith and John Carlos. But there's also the Mahmoud Raoul Abduf, standing before the flag or sitting near the national anthem and holding and praying Quran. There's Wilma Rudolph, who challenged Jim Crow South in her actions. There's Ariana Smith, a young woman from Knox College, Illinois, who laid down on the floor at a basketball game to protest the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. There was also the Cleveland Summit, where Cleveland Browns Hall of Fame running back Jim Brown presided over a meeting of top African-American athletes on June 4th, 1967, to show support for boxer Muhammad Ali's refusal to fight in Vietnam. Present were individuals Bill Russell, Muhammad Ali, of course, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who at that time was going by his original name, his born name of Lou Alcindor, Carl Stokes, Walter Beach, Bobby Mitchell, John Wooten, and others. The issues around Black resistance, Black athlete resistance is not a new phenomenon. Colin Kaepernick took a knee, but long before he took a knee, other Black athletes stood up to actually engage in a process of pushing back against a society that simply tried to define them in one particular way. I'm so very proud to have these two individuals speaking here today. Cynthia Frisby is sort of like a homecoming. 23 years here, is back, and a lot of things her a little bit of her flowers here. She is a nationally recognized authority on media portrayals of minorities, athletes, women, and teens. Her work has been highly influential and widely cited. According to Google Scholar, 20 of her papers have been cited more than 300 times. She has presented as a keynote speaker or invited panelist for major academic conferences and associations, such as the Association for Educational Journalism and Mass Communication and the International Communication Association. She's been asked to present diversity training workshops for organizations that include, but are not limited to, the state of Missouri and the Missouri Department of National Resources. Her studies show how media messages contribute toward creating or maintaining stereotypes and biases against minorities, athletes, women, and teens. And among other topics, she has investigated the sources of American viewers' fascination with reality television and effects of idealized images, of perceptions of body esteem. She also studies race and gender representation in sports. She analyzed coverage of Black male athletes by magazines and news websites from 2002 through 2012, and demonstrated that news stories involving instances of crime or violence were more heavily covered when they involved Black athletes. She provides research-based decision-making assistance to health organizations developing communication campaigns for underserved populations. And she's conducted 2 separate studies on effective messaging on breast cancer prevention among African-American women. So a great deal, of course, of expertise in a variety of areas. She is the professor of strategic communications in the Gaylord College of Journalism and Mass Communication, specializing in consumer culture and cultural competence in public relations at the University of Oklahoma. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Cynthia. Our other speaker, who's had a harrowing trip getting here, because of course he flew through Chicago, getting to our fair city. We're sort of stuck, but he's here, which is great. Yay. Dr. Joseph N. Cooper is the inaugural Dr. J. Keith Motley Endowed Chair of Sport Leadership and Administration at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Prior to UMass Boston, Professor Cooper served as an associate professor at the University of Connecticut in the Sport Management Program, Department of Educational Leadership, and Mead School of Education. He earned his undergraduate degrees in sociology and recreation administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, his master's degree in sport administration in the Department of Exercise and Sports Science from UNC Chapel Hill as well, and his doctorate in kinesiology with concentration in sport management and policy from the University of Georgia in Athens. His research agenda focuses on the intersection between sport, education, race, and culture, with an emphasis on sport involvement as a catalyst for holistic development. He is also the faculty founder of Collective Uplift, an organization designed to educate, empower, inspire, and support individuals to maximize their holistic potential both within and beyond athletic context. He has presented research at international, national, and regional conferences and published numerous peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, edited books, and op-ed contributions. And as a result of his research, he has been cited in various media outlets, including New York Times, Boston Globe, ESPN, Le Monde, ABC News, Yahoo, and diverse issues in higher education. And he's the author of From Exploitation Back to Empowerment, Black Male Holistic Underdevelopment Through Sport and Miseducation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. So this is an open-ended conversation between these two distinct scholars. I will be moderating and we will open up actually at some point for questions. But I want to throw it out for our scholars to first have a conversation about one, the very topic itself. We're not playing anymore athletes and resistance, sort of an opening sort of salvo, if you will, and then we will engage from there.
Okay. I'll kind of start because it feels kind of eerie that these events kind of happened at the same time. So one of my students in my grad class is the niece of Angela Davis. And Angela Davis, as you know, if you follow is it Henry Louis Gates that has the Back to Your Roots or whatever? So she was on last night and my student said, can we watch my aunt? That's oh my God, Angela Davis. And so what was interesting for me was to just kind of hear her story and what we need to do to see change. Like, it doesn't mean that you have a very different characteristic or a special power, it just takes you doing what you believe is really right. So what I think, needs to happen now, given just, a lot of some of the controversies or pushback, like Colin now has lost his job, basically, just like Muhammad Ali lost they stripped everything away from him. But as I started looking back at our history, I thought, well, you know what, the just shut up and dribble came from the larger culture of slavery, when you weren't supposed to speak out to your master, you weren't supposed to speak out about anything that you disliked. And if you did, what happened? Right. And so I think this just shut up and play comes from that mentality. And I'm not really sure if anybody has ever talked to somebody that that has a very strong feeling about the kneeling during the flag. But I started thinking, so why he kneels, right? And people would say, yeah, like social justice. So why are you mad? Because I feel like in order to see us move the needle, we have to be able to have those candid conversations. I might get mad, but I need to give you your space to share what I need to hear, because we all have lived experiences that are very different, but those lived experiences make us who we are today. But when you find out, like, people don't really know why they're mad, and when you kind of ask them, so what they're trying to fight for, what they're trying to get us to be aware of. So my question this past week was, did you stand up and put your hand over your heart at the Super Bowl party? You had 3 different kinds of anthems, right? Did you make everybody at your party stop and do that? Oh, they have a lot of excuses, but when you're getting at the core of an issue, you are going to be angry because you don't really want to admit what your issue is about the whole problem of why he's kneeling. So I don't know how many of you have seen Mississippi Burning. Do you remember that part where William Dafoe's character is asking, oh my gosh, I'm old, I forget stuff easily, but you remember that he was saying, I don't understand why the hate. And then he starts describing the fact that his dad used to pass the farm, and the Black farm owner was able to buy, was it a donkey or something like that?
Yep.
A mule. And the dad was kind of mad that he had this mule. And the next time they passed, the mule died. It had been poisoned. And so Gene Hackman, right? Is that his character? So he is explaining that, or saying that, I knew my dad did that. I knew my dad was responsible for killing the mule. But he said, here's the problem that we are seeing. And this was Mississippi Burning, supposed to be in the 60s, is that he was explaining that his dad didn't want to see this subhuman, or what they considered not to be person, to have the same joys or the same resources, or even better resources. So his dad didn't have a mule, but this African-American farm owner did. And that's the whole thing. So if you've watched 13th on Netflix, what's the one thing that you hear people who are very angry say? they want their country back. That we are taking resources, right? So I think, like, to get at the issue that is what's going on with athletes, it's a larger, more complex issue. But I think it takes people, like Angela Davis was saying, she can't do it by herself. It takes a concerted effort. And so as I look around this room to see, it's not just Blacks, it's not just whites, it's not just young, it's not just old. I think that's what we kind of have to think about and strategize, and how we can move the needle together. So what do you think?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Honored to be here. It's a very special feeling, particularly the Mizzou football boycott a couple of years ago. I've been doing research on sport activism for several years now, and to be here is really special. I'm originally from North Carolina and very familiar with the history of the state of Missouri in terms of being a former Confederate state. With my open remarks, there are a couple of kind of themes that I'll connect with the role of sport today, conversations around social justice, racial justice, why people should play, why they should not play, and what does that mean? One question that's really fundamental we have to ask is, who and what is a human? I think that's very important because we're living in a society that was founded upon the dehumanization. We talk a lot about slavery, which was very heinous and problematic. At its base, slavery is an economic system, right, which strips people of their humanity. Is that your labor, your body doesn't belong to you. When you think about people's families being sold, when you think about people being raped, when you think about people being lynched, it's an idea of I own everything about you. That's why in the 21st century, what Black people choose to do with their bodies, what they choose to do with their minds, and what they choose to do with how they speak, it strikes a chord in a history of anti-Black racism within the United States and globally, quite frankly, because what you're supposed to do with your body, you're not supposed to think. You're supposed to make money for me. You're supposed to entertain me, right? So the shut up and dribble, notice they don't say shut up and don't do anything. It's and dribble. You got to do something else. Like, be quiet, but entertain, right? Let me fetishize over you. Let me make money off of you. So the idea of who and what is a human is very important. The next question in relation to the center that we are here on behalf of is who and what is a citizen? Whose citizenship rights are protected and who's not, right? Because if you are a citizen, you should have the right to free speech, right? You should be able to peacefully express yourself. I always ask my students, which knee were you more upset about? Kaepernick's or Chauvin? Which knee? Which knee? Both knees were pressed down. One knee took someone's life. Another knee was seeking to save lives. But the reaction to those knees was very different. Kaepernick's knee, you could time how long, they call it the national anthem, but we could have a more complex conversation about Francis Scott's Keys and should we actually be singing that, right? But even if you were to time it, even in the most eloquent way that it may be performed, roughly 3 minutes of a song. Chauvin's knee, the accurate time was 9 minutes and 46 seconds that took the life out of George Floyd. So the idea of who is a citizen, who's protected by laws, we can get into the history of policing, how it was created. We can get even to the history of sport, modern day sport, and how Black people, the introduction into sport was largely grounded under exploitative terms. Jockeying in the late 1800s, baseball in the late 1800s, boxing, right? Where they had this thing called the battle royale, where enslaved people, not slaves, people who were enslaved were forced to fight each other and literally beat each other until either the death or till a knockout. And the one who was the fiercest was promoted. So this idea of fighting for literally your humanity, right? Imagine if you have to fight, say, if I can fight well, I will no longer be relegated to this subhuman status. I think you would probably be a very skilled fighter too. So it's not something that you're doing just for recreation, something that I just enjoy. It's important to understand the context. For Black people, participation in sport, like many other avenues in our society, was a pathway to gain humanity treatment and citizenship rights. That's a very different dynamic than I just want to be in good shape. I just want to build a healthy mind, body, and spirit, right? This idea of muscular Christianity, this idea of this fitness, Protestant ethic grounded in fitness. So I think that's really important to understand. As it relates to more modern day, the idea of what you do with your body and who benefits the most from it is a critical question. Where are Black people relegated in our society in a critical mass? I could say the prison industrial complex. I could say in the MNFL, and I didn't misspeak. I said MNFL because if we're going to call it the Women's National Basketball Association, then we need to demarcate men's.
Nice.
A part of what we've got to do, a lot of what we do when we come to college or when we go and do things, what are we doing? We're seeking to learn and gain knowledge. I talk to students all the time. What you learn is equally as important as what you need to unlearn, because there's a lot of miseducation that has been disseminated through schools, through media, through various avenues that we take for granted as normal. Right? So I say, hey, NBA, who plays in it? Oh, basketball players. Which basketball players, right? So why do we have to say women? We can get into that. And if we're going to say historically Black colleges and universities, we have to say we're at a historically white college and university, because we need to understand the origins and the foundations under which the institution was established. Who was it designed for? Over the years, there have been numerous people who have sought to break barriers, to change norms, foundations, and policies so that everyone's included. But we could do a cursory scan of the athletic department here, right? Hit a little home, right? Where are the Black athletes represented? How much money do those sports generate for the athletic department? Are we making sure that they're supported mental health wise, post-athletic career, transition wise, right? A number of these things. Are we even trying to address the underrepresentation in certain sports? Or are we okay that certain sports have 100% white student athlete population? That's not a problem to any of us, right? So a part of it is this idea of who's a human, who's a citizen, what do you do with your body, who benefits the most, and who's disadvantaged, not only in the short term, in the long term. And I look forward to the continued conversation about this very important topic. Oof.
That was excellent.
A lot.
So, one of the things, you made a couple of points, I was taking notes, but I want to add to media's role and how they frame situations. That's kind of been my, what do you call it? I don't know, just my agenda lately. Because I keep thinking about if the media had done a better job in framing, let's say, why Collins first started kneeling. He sat on the bench for 3 weeks before anybody paid him any attention. And then what made him kneel? A beret, somebody really gave him this scathing editorial and said, you should be kneeling. We kneel for respect. We kneel when we pray. We kneel when a soldier is shot down. So, but the media left out those narratives. But they also left out, there's this kind of theory of framing that if you tell the story and if you give the facts that led up to an event, right, people will have less stereotypical or biased thoughts about that story. But if you, like we saw that with the protest here at Mizzou, when they boiled it down to one student who decided to starve himself, the stories then went down to the football team, who comprises the football team. So people started, what I know, I saw all kinds of comments. They need to take their scholarships away. And a lot of the comments were coming from outside of our community, right? So my thing is that's media. The media framed it in such a way that They didn't educate us about how the national anthem started. They didn't tell us the story that, does anybody know how the national anthem started playing at sporting games, sporting events? Because it's not at every sporting event, right? It was back, I think we were in World War II. And it was a baseball game. The Chicago White Sox, I think, were playing the Boston White Sox, or one of those Sox. I don't. And so what was interesting about that, because so this was a chapter in my recent book on current controversies in sports. But what was interesting was it was during the war, and of course the stands were scant because most of the men were, serving. So I can't remember if it was the coach or the manager of the Chicago team looked up in the stands and told the band, start playing something, right? And so they played the national anthem and the crowd went wild. So this was like the World Series. So when it went to Boston for the next game, the Boston person said, you're not gonna outdo us. So they started playing it at the beginning of the game. That's how it started. And so it wasn't even a football thing. I don't know about any of you, some of you look younger than this, but there was a time where the athletes didn't come on the field till after the anthem. You guys remember? I remember, like pro, at least pro, they didn't come out on the field till after the anthem. So when did it change? And I don't think the national anthem is played at every sport. It's not even played at every event we have. Is it? I think it might be played at graduation. But is it played at every big formal? That's a question that I have.
No, not at concerts, not at movie theaters.
Not at golf tournaments.
Not at golf.
I mean, I think it's also important to think about if one, do research on Francis Scott Keys.
Yeah.
We don't want to erase what history was. We understand the context in which things took place. But the third stanza of the national anthem actually talks about the killing of African Americans who were fighting for slavery to be ended, right? And I think about how just offensive and disrespectful that is, that you would expect African Americans today, if we really understood, getting back to the miseducation and the proper education, to stand for something that talks about killing our ancestors. I think about the backlash that Kyrie Irving got for posting a video about a documentary that had, I haven't seen it, but that allegedly to have some anti-Semitic, and it was like, don't do that. But every day we're supposed to stand for the national anthem that talks about literally killing African Americans. Like the lack of sensitivity to our humanity, right? I always bring up the question to students. I say, like, I'll bring up slavery and students are like, yeah, it's bad. I'll say something about the Holocaust. It's a little bit different reaction. I'll say something about a woman being, taken advantage of, a white woman specifically being taken advantage of, a little different reaction. So the human Q in you kicks off if I say a Jewish person in the Holocaust. Nobody would ever say, hey, I think a Jewish person today should have to listen to something that in Nazi Germany was created. But for us, African Americans, national anthem have no issue with it. There's nothing, no difference at all between those words being said about killing us, right? Because it wasn't, you can look it up for yourself. It's very clear what the message was. And it goes back to the shut up and dribble. That shut up and dribble quote is embedded within our society about what your proper position should be in this role, in this country. We are fine if you entertain us, if you make money for us, if you satisfy us, if you continue to be inferior, not because you actually are inferior, but we're just going to create systems that make it so difficult for you to experience upward mobility that it affirms our racist beliefs. Because we do know that race is a social construct, right? That there are more genetic similarities across quote unquote racial groups than within, right? We have different cultures, different ethnicities, but genetically we are human beings. So the idea that I can tell you that, I always give this example to my students. If I were to say by the thickness of your eyebrows, the length of your toenails, and the size of your ears, I'm going to say who's intelligent, who's not. They always get a chuckle, right? I say by the same things, the thickness of your eyebrows, whether you got them waxed today or not, right? The length of your toenails, whether you cut them or not, the length of your ears or not, I'm going to determine how athletic you are, how fast you can run the 40-yard dash, how high you can jump. We do the same thing with skin color. We do the same thing with genitalia. So they laugh when I give other examples of arbitrary distinctions, but we live in a society that has normalized those same type of arbitrary distinctions, right? The creation of the IQ test, the creation of the SAT, all of this idea, if I say Lamar Jackson, athletic quarterback, can dodge and run, right? Tom Brady, intelligent, smart, knows how to maneuver. But I look at their QBR ratings and I'm like, Lamar Jackson had a better throw percentage. It's because of the coach, John Harbaugh. There's always got to be something to make the Black athlete inferior intellectually. And a lot of our colleagues and myself talk about athletics is a form of intelligence. It is a form to kinesthetic intelligence is a form of intelligence. I tell students, if you think doing chemistry and physics problems is difficult, I'll put you in a football locker room and tell me if you could run this particular. Not only do you have to think about it schematically, but physically you have to perform the task. Most grad students will fail out of the football class, right? But we don't call that intelligence. We don't. But oh no, anybody can do that. That's a dumb jock thing to do. Really? Really? To figure out and to anticipate and to move in particular ways. So this is what I mean by deconstructing what we constitute as smart, who we constitute as smart. And it goes into, as my colleague has mentioned, the media narratives, right? The language is coded to perpetuate a certain message. And if you as the consumer aren't activating your critical thinking skills, you're just going to passively accept and reproduce narratives that have already been pre-coded. Media is designed to filter and represent information, misinformation, and disinformation to keep you thinking and perpetuating a certain way of doing, right? Whether it's spending dollars, right? Whether it's not protesting. Because if I can convince you to just pay attention to sport and not ask critical questions about, well, these football programs, SEC schools, right, then make a lot of money. What about the surrounding communities where many of these athletes come from? Are those television right deals and corporate sponsorship deals going to be reinvested in those areas? What about the athletes after they graduate? Not just the select few that we bring back and say, hey, they're doing great things. What about the ones that have been struggling? Some who've attempted and thought about suicide, some who are dealing with physical ailments for bleeding, sweating, pushing their bodies to the extreme at your university while you are clapping. Now the health insurance doesn't cover them because they're far removed from their time at the university. It's about who matters and how and why. And that's why I love what the Mizzou football players did here is they redirected the conversation that our humanity matters, not just when we put the helmets on and we're entertaining. It matters when we're walking to class. It matters when we're stopped by police. It matters when we go to a party off campus. Our humanity matters, right? And if you're not going to value us and people who look like us, I hear that Ferguson's not too far from here, right? If you're not going to value us when we are outside of the athletic uniform, then we're going to not continue to play your games to entertain. And you're inconvenienced because a game wasn't played. We're inconvenienced because lives are being lost. We've got to have an honest conversation about why are people upset? If people choose to not stand for the national anthem, once again, I want everybody you talk to after this presentation, would you ask any Jewish person to stand for anything that had any reference to? You wouldn't. You would think that would be terribly insensitive. But for African Americans, we don't even get to that part of the conversation because one, we don't talk enough about the third stanza. We don't talk enough about Francis Scott Key's. People always say, well, slavery ended. For many African Americans, we would say it just evolved. It hasn't fully ended. If it fully ended, we wouldn't have the mass incarceration complex. If it fully ended, Brian Flores wouldn't have to sue the NFL because of fake interviews to get a job, a head coaching position. right? Lamar Jackson wouldn't have to be a former NFL MVP, wouldn't have to be going through this long, extensive process where Kirk Cousins, who is far less accomplished, has a extended multi-million-dollar contract.
Okay.
Going after Kirk.
Cliff Kingsbury, the head coach of the former head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, had a losing record as a college coach and got a head coaching position and got fired from the Arizona Cardinals and gets a $40 million payout. So you lose in college, get a head coaching job, lose in the NFL, get $40 million to go away, and Eric Bieniemy, offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, two-time Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator, by the way, doesn't even get a head coaching position with Washington Commanders. And I think they created the title, associate head coach, offensive coordinator. What are we doing? Right? So when we talk about the racism, it's still with us today. A lot of what we're talking about from a historical context, we're living in times where there's gross injustices happening right now in sport and outside of sport. And the question becomes, what are we doing about it? Right? Are we just watching the games, just enjoying it, playing fantasy football, which I'm sorry, fantasy football fans, not to ruin your experience, but that's also a form of dehumanization, right? I get to buy this, oh, such and such got injured, they didn't play well, just gonna trade them, move them. Sounds like psychologically during slavery times, oh, you're not picking as much cotton, you're not being as productive, I can just dismiss you. Now, I know that's not your intention when you're playing fantasy football, but I think it's important that we begin to ask that question. You don't have fantasy sports across all sports. The ones where it's the most popular are with football and basketball.
And baseball.
And baseball, right? Which has a high Latino population.
Changes,
Right, and which actually its demographic has changed.
Absolutely.
So I want to slide in. Because there are a lot of things that you said that I want to get to. I could be here all day. I love like so one of the things I think I want to go back to one of the original comments where you both raised this issue about slavery and the sports analogy. So Bill wrote in New York Times, author wrote a book, $40 Million Slaves. And the response that people had was, how can people who have such lucrative contracts be even analogized to being a slave in this context, right? That basically class and your class position allows you to escape what would be the fundamental issues around race that someone who doesn't have that class back, right? And so what would you say to that, right? And you think about it, and so in the same vein, I think about those Black athletes who choose not to engage in protest or resistance. So we talked earlier about Michael Jordan, his famous quote, "Republicans buy shoes too," right?
people were so mad at him.
Right. So I mean, and then how do you get a core group of individuals who do stand up, and those who basically say, I'm not going to engage in this particular act of resistance, if you will?
Interesting question. I have so many different thoughts going on, but I think there's a couple of things like in my book, we talked about what a lot of people, I remember, didn't Mike Tyson go bankrupt more than once? Like he just frivolously spent money. And so in researching that, what's interesting is that people don't take into context that where the athletes come from. So they might come from very low income places, and then all of a sudden they're millionaires, and so they haven't really had the guidance to help them learn how to manage their money, right? So I think that's a little bit far away from what you're talking about with the slave, but didn't Colin also in his Netflix story talk about feeling like he was a slave or something like that? Because I remember there was some controversy. Doesn't he have a documentary that's on Netflix?
Yeah.
And did he make a comment? Because I haven't seen it yet. I just have been following it. Did he make a comment about slavery in that?
I don't recall that. I don't recall him saying that.
So when he was a kid or something. So I have to go, I'm gonna have to watch it because I'm gonna have to write a new edition for my book. But it just like when we talk about money, it seems like one of the other things my research found is that bans are harder on Black athletes who maybe misspend their money. I can't remember, Mike Tyson always comes to mind, but there's been several others who dealt with bankruptcy, right? And it just seems like there's been more attacks toward them than others. So in my research too, I found, for example, there's a Q sort where you can do most likable players. So advertising and PR people, if I need to get a spokesperson, I can go to this large database and find who's the #1 person to be in a message for me that would have some influence on my market, right? So during the time that I started in this area, the 5 most likable players were Tom Brady, or not Tom Brady, Brett from the Green,
Brett Favre.
Brett Favre, Roethlisberger. Yeah, okay. Oh wait, it's gonna get even weirder than that, right? Okay, so let's put Brett and just leave it at that. So when you go to, all I did was type in most disliked athletes. Who do you think was on there? LeBron James. Okay, LeBron James is on there because it was right around the time he left Ohio and went to Miami. But didn't Brett change around the same time and go from Green Bay to Minnesota? Okay, right? Michael Vick. What was Michael Vick's biggest crime? What was Brett's alleged abusing women? So
Yeah.
no, but you know, like if you went back and looked, so I published this in my book, but that for every 5 top most liked athlete, there was a Black athlete that did similar work, basically accused of doing similar quote unquote crimes or whatever. Chad Ochocinco, I hear he's changed his name back, and Terrell Owens were on the most disliked. You know why? They were just loud and obnoxious, just like Muhammad Ali was during his era, right? So again, my thing is we have to kind of look at the role that the media plays in framing these athletes. So when I ask people in my work, like, are you saying a dog is more important than a woman? So help me as a researcher understand those 2 rankings, right? Because I really don't get it. I'm sure you guys don't either. And so I wanted to say that we all have to kind of take a moment to see and understand the kind of silent nuances in the messages we're constantly exposed to over and over in the media. So in framing, Inman is a researcher, very prolific, and he said Black men are always going to be framed in one of 3 ways: criminal, entertainer, or athlete. The perfect example of that was when LeBron James was on the cover of that magazine, and it totally replicated King Kong. Remember, he was in his uniform, and Giselle was in this beautiful evening dress. Why did he have to be in the uniform? Why couldn't he be in a tuxedo? And so one of the things, that's what started me on this path, because why is it that that cover had to go through a series of approvals? In advertising, it goes through a series of approvals. Let's not even, first of all, let's not even talk just about men. Serena. Serena gets awful press, you know, and you even have what I disliked more than anything. You had Black sports reporters talking badly about her body, right? So we can't say that any one race or gender is immune to some of the things narratives we're taking in, right? And so I just remember, and I don't know if you guys remember the cover of Sports Illustrated where Serena is in this chair and she's got one leg strapped over in a dress. Does anybody remember seeing that? You remember that? So she's sitting like this. I'm like, Serena, you don't need to do that, you know? But in all my talks, and I loved working with the athletic department here, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why. They have financial planning where they teach every athlete about how to manage their finances. I know, because I got to engage in some of those workshops, and they do a lot of these other things. And I'll never forget when I started going to talk to them about media images and athletes. Got so much pushback from the women. You know why? They were like, if we don't do that, we're not going to make as much money. No, that's not true. Just ask them, can I take this cover in my uniform? Or if you put me in the ad, can I take it in an action shot on the tennis court doing my thing? Do I have to be scantily clad? You know, and so what was interesting is I really find it fascinating, and it's extremely rewarding when the students and the athletes that I work with start realizing, oh my God, why did I come up with that idea? So here's the other thing to keep in mind. African-American kids, according to Nielsen Media Research, watch 8 hours more television than the Caucasian kid. So if you have a Caucasian kid that you know that doesn't watch that much television, that means there's a Black kid that's making up for that statistic. So if you know somebody that they don't watch any television in their household, there's a Black kid that's watching it 16 hours a week more than that white kid. And that's why if you've seen video vixens or Beyond Beats and Rhymes, you'll see that a lot of African-American or brown and Black skinned children want to aspire to be the dancer in a hip hop video. Or young Black boys think that they're going to make it to the NFL. When we know what is the percentage of people that actually get to the NFL? It's like less than 2%.
1%.
Yeah.
Better odds than medical school, Sandra.
What's that?
Better odds than medical school.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing.
Yeah. But but what's interesting is, what they're getting from the media. We have a lot of kids that are watching, they're called latchkey kids. Anybody heard of latchkey kids? I was a latchkey kid, but my mom always knew Dark Shadows was on, and I wasn't supposed to be watching Dark Shadows, and because I would have nightmares. But what I guess I'm saying is you have a lot of kids that are taking in and soaking in these ideas with nobody to kind of give them a new frame, right? And a new way to kind of rethink, why do I think this way? Or, like I remember with the athletes when they would say, yeah, why do I think I need to dress like that? You remember when I used to come do those talks? Yeah, and it was really, really, I think enlightening, because you guys remember Wesley Stokes? He was the basketball player here. So my first time, I'm telling them how to work with the media, right? And Wesley Snoops was like this, and and I'm saying, okay, here's how you want to do media interviews, and I'm trying to get him. And so I had to go up to him and I said, look, young man, my son adores you. Sit up. So we go to these role play. So what are they doing? Asking them questions and trying to teach them. They go, we just didn't show up for the game. That's what. Here, let's talk about that public image. Okay, Wesley, you want to get more play? Okay, how about you say an answer like this? And so I gave him a script, but it was so hard to get through. So, we can sit here and kind of talk about a lot of different things. And I can tell you with some athletes, it has been the worst or the most challenging thing to get them to rethink what they need to do in order to kind of be successful. I think I'm going to say. So how would you say, what would you say about that? Because I do find that very, very, very challenging.
I got a couple of thoughts. I want to go back to what David, first part about the $40 million slaves question before I forget. Money, particularly for groups that have historically and contemporarily been oppressed, money doesn't translate to freedom. And I'm gonna give you a couple of examples about that. Donald Trump can say very offensive things. His financial standing normally isn't affected. I know he's filed bankruptcy multiple times, but he's still considered a multimillionaire at minimum, a billionaire at maximum. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, has made a number of comments, right? He was actually one of the few owners during the protest who said, if the players on my team kneel, they're not going to have a job, which is a violation of their First Amendment rights. But we could talk about private versus public organizations, the legalities of that. When Kanye West made a statement about Jewish people being influential in Hollywood, within 48 hours, his billionaire status had been dropped significantly. Paul Robeson, former standout athlete at Rutgers University, at the height of his singing and performance career, was earning up in the six figures, traveling the world, right? Which would be in millions this in modern day times. As soon as he started criticizing the US government for mistreatment of African Americans, and in 1951, when he co-authored a petition to the United Nations saying we charge genocide, he subsequently, his earnings, the US government stripped his passport, and subsequently his salary went from the six figures to the four figures. And he died in his 70s, very much younger than he should have, due to health issues as a result of that cumulative pressure, or what scholars call racial battle fatigue, right? It's a combination of psychological stress, physiological maladaptive responses to constant barrages, literal and figurative, on your existence as a being. So the notion, the reason why Michael Jordan is a billionaire, the reason why these others, is because they are being complicit. And I like Michael Jordan. He's from North Carolina. I love North Carolinian. I don't buy his shoes or anything like that. I think their price too high, quite honestly. That's a separate economic conversation. But the reason why when Bill Rhoden says $40 million slaves is because that payment is contingent upon certain behavior. That's not freedom. That's not freedom. If it's freedom, I can say something that you may not like, and I still am able to get my salary. I'm still able to play. But every time a Black athlete says something too much, Colin Kaepernick's not in the NFL the last time I checked, correct? They're steady trying to push Kyrie out of the NBA, right? You know, Maya Moore and Renee Montgomery just said, hey, we're stepping away from the game altogether, albeit for different reasons, but it was connected to championing racial justice. They felt they could be more effective. And so that connects to the second part of David's question about, I think it's important for us to know there's different ways to resist and there's different ways to engage in activism. Too often we have a limited view of what type of social change is actually effective. There are a lot of protests that are very important. There are a lot of protests that have happened that were very important and necessary. But many of those protests did not structurally change the structure of our society, let alone an athletic department. What does that mean? It requires multiple forms of resistance. I give you this analogy. Body parts and a toolkit and positions on a team. Your arm serves a purpose, correct? If I were to ask your arm to breathe, does that make sense? If I were to ask your eyes to kick, does that make sense? What we're doing when it comes to social change and activism, we're asking protests to do things that legal action should be doing. We're asking political action to be doing. We're asking grassroots organizing to be doing. We're asking educational institutions to be doing. When you have a toolkit, it's very difficult to get a screwdriver to do what a hammer was designed to do. If I were to ask Tom Brady to run a slant route, I don't think he would be a Hall of Famer. My point being that every type of activism, symbolic, which is protest, grassroots organizing, mass mobilization, media activism, economic activism, legal activism, music and art activism, political and civic activism, fashion activism, all of them play a critical part in pushing change forward. But if we limit our understanding to, if you don't protest, you're not for social change, it's just like telling your arm you're useless because you don't blink. Telling your knee you're useless because you don't cough, right? Like you wouldn't say that about a body part. You definitely wouldn't say that about different tools in a toolkit. And you certainly wouldn't say that about different positions on a team. So we've got to be more strategic about, and the reason why the civil rights movements and the Black women feminist movement and the Black power movements were so effective in their efforts was because they had multiple people in different places advocating for change. We were talking earlier, you had a Thurgood Marshall, right? But you also had Malcolm X. right? You also had people who are building on the legacy of Ida B. Wells, right? You have Wilma Rudolph, you have Althea Gibson, but you also have Harry Edwards, right? You also have Tommy Smith and John Carlos. So the idea of everybody having to do the exact same thing for social change to happen, it just doesn't make sense. I think we need to maximize the talents of all people within a group, including allies from other racial groups. This is a part of your struggle too. And if you don't think so, long enough, you're going to see if you care that much about your tax dollars, if you care that much about your guns, if you care that much about your freedoms, right? If you keep ignoring issues that affect other populations, it's going to affect you too eventually. So that was for the second part of your question, David. To your question about the athletes, a lot of that to me is understanding the context. A lot of times the institutions where these athletes are recruited to be and enrolled are significantly different than their pre-college dynamics. And imagine at 17, 18 for any of us being put in front of, you think about all the attention LeBron James got at 18 years old. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at 16 years old. They criticized LeBron James' grammatical accuracy in his speech more than anybody else. Anybody else. Oh, he didn't conjugate the verb correctly. And oh, that didn't make sense. Or he doesn't know about that. And I'm like, has anybody ever read a Mark Twain book? Way more grammatical errors than LeBron James in any of his interviews. But you don't call that out. Anybody heard the previous President Trump speak? A lot of grammatical errors. But right. But we don't scrutinize him in that way. And so I think a part of it is, in my mind, giving these young men and women a little grace that they're young adults stepping into out of adolescence at a Division I institution that's high profile. They're being confronted with a lot of pressure, number one, and helping them understand that is really important. It takes time. Also finding their voice in that space, because I'm sure there have been some white student athletes and some others who've been like this too. But as you were mentioning, the perception mapped to them is not the same. Someone sees them, it's like, oh, they're probably tired because they just got done with practice. The Black athlete, oh, they just don't know how to act or behave in front of the camera. And it's like, well, no, I got through with the same practice that he did, and we all are tired. So I think it's helping them understand kind of the magnitude of what they're walking into. It does take time to get used to that. And I think it's got to be a balance. I think on some level, they need to be able to communicate what they're feeling and saying in ways that are digestible or appealing to certain audiences. But I put the pressure on the listeners and the media to let's redefine what we call professionalism. Because a lot of Black athletes, they get asked a question, they give an honest response, and the media is like, well, no, that's not what I wanted you to say. You didn't ask me to tell me what you want. You asked me for my response. My response is, I think this is ridiculous and it's a waste of my time. But you want me to say, yes, I'm very proud to be a student athlete here at the university, and I appreciate all the resources. Like, it's do you want them to be honest, or do you want them to kind of play a role? And we talk a lot about this with athletes. They have identities, roles, and statuses. Typically in society, we only value partial identities that they have. We're very comfortable when they're in certain roles, so we elevate their status when they're in their roles, and they only highlight a part of their identity, which is a form of dehumanization, by the way, right? Because if I tell you I'm only going to honor one part of your identity, we get students to do this all the time. Write down every identity you possess. And let's say I only treat you that way just based on that identity. Don't tell me about your gender, because all I'm going to focus on is your race. Don't tell me about your religion. Don't tell me about your sexual identity. Don't tell me about your other interests. You have a role to play. You are just white. Whatever my perception of you being white, you got to fulfill that role and you will be rewarded. We do that with Black athletes all the time, right? They can't be critical thinkers about politics, right? Shut up and dribble. They can't be musicians. They can't be regular college students who sometimes tweet really ridiculous things. They can't go to a party and sometimes have a little too much to drink, right? Because the implications for them are much worse. And that's an unfortunate reality. So the great work that you were doing with them is to help them understand it is not fair, but you are playing by a different set of rules than everyone else on this campus. Massive
a
tax.
massive black tax, but that's what I give credit to the athletic department. Because they started many different programs for our athletes, like, resume, career fairs. I don't know if they still do that or not, but you should see all the wonderful work that I know that they were doing 3 years ago, but so what, does anybody know if there is a official successful athlete resistance that's happened in?
Well, so my question be, so I'm gonna open up the questions. It's 5:30. I'm gonna open up the questions for folks here. But the question is, what's the personal and professional cost of athlete resistance? We would talked about, so you got Tommy Smith and John Carlos, right? What happens when the lights go down? They're no longer on the stage. Muhammad Ali, right?
Yeah,
Supreme Court, he comes back, right? Older, out of his prime, right? What happens after the resistance is over? Because then the question becomes, what have we done to them, and what has society done? And and here's the difficult question. Would an athlete say that the resistance was worth it?
okay, real quick question. Jackie Robinson had an older brother, Mark Robinson, who won Olympic gold, was part of, like, with Jesse Owens.
Oh,
Remember the Berlin, the Germany thing? So here's what happened to answer that question. He comes back, he had to end up working as a street cleaner. Okay, so because I can't remember if he and Jesse Owens did a fist.
Jesse did not.
Jesse did not, but I told what happened to him. He wore his Olympic jacket while he was cleaning the streets in a white neighborhood. Guess what happened? They called the police on him and forced him to take off his jacket. And so other stories that I read about those athletes, it's like, so like I was reading today and thinking about this, Colin has basically stayed very silent, because guess what? People now are having to deal with this whole concept of cancel culture.
Right.
But you understand what I'm saying? So I think we don't hear those stories for some reason. So I've been trying to figure out, what did Muhammad Ali do when they took everything away? Because ultimately he died a legend. Like, what I mean? And they were calling him a goat and all that stuff. So now my friends are always like, do you ever stop thinking about research questions? But think about it, like, what did he do to get back to that status? The media didn't tell us.
So?
Huh?
Oh, I take
You do?
I agree. Yeah, because I think that part of the restoration of Muhammad Ali as an American hero figure coincided with, like, his physical evolution. Like, he was no longer a threat. And if every image that you saw of Muhammad Ali in his later years, like, he's shaken from Parkinson's, he's like barely able to lift the Olympic torch. And so him being, his masculinity, his vigor, his strength was robbed from him. And so in his prime, he was not allowed to be, but he was allowed to be when those things were gone.
That's interesting. Okay. I'll have to look at that. I think that's a good point, but I just don't remember the media covering him as much. Like, that's what I'm gonna have to kind of go back and quantify. Like, did they even cover those stories with him shaking, not to the extent that they did when they were dehumanizing him.
I mean, I think it's something to be said for the fact that I think people were a little bit giddy when he returned to boxing and got beat.
Yeah.
Times, right? When he was basically, it was his comeuppance, right? It was clearly here. This is what you deserve in this context, right? And that was the process. That was, I mean, in the sense that he was no longer in his prime. He was no longer where he could have been.
Yeah.
But it's sort of think about that. So I mean,
Yeah, I think just a couple of thoughts in terms of the price of resistance. The price is high. I'll just put it frankly. It's the same price that Dr. King took when he got shot and killed. Right. I think about, I was talking with a colleague the other day about the Haitian Revolution. A lot of people talk about how significant it was. It was the first group of Africans who were enslaved, who were able to overturn the European colonizers, the French, the Spaniards, the British. But what a lot of people don't talk about is the Haitian Revolution lasted from 1791 to 1804, and over 200,000 Haitians died. Within the Civil War in the United States, thousands of African Americans died. The price of freedom is high for oppressed groups. In terms of, is it worth it? it all depends on what was your reason for doing it in the first place. Because people like Ida B. Wells Barnett fought for anti-lynching laws in the United States that she never got to see. And quite frankly, we don't have the anti-lynching laws in 2023. So I think if you're looking at it from an intergenerational struggle standpoint, and as you mentioned, from a legacy standpoint and the precedent that is setting, it is absolutely worth it. Because somebody has to be courageous enough to make these stands. Everybody cannot be complicit. And unfortunately, many of our heroes, she-ros, and they-ros don't get recognized and truly celebrated until years after it happens. But I think if you are a person that's convicted by social justice, you feel like doing the moral and correct thing is always, the time is always now to do it. You got to know it's going to come with the cost. And, you know, for me, regardless of your spiritual system, whichever you believe, typically whenever you're doing something that is transformative, at the time that you're doing it, it's not going to be popular, and it's going to come with a high cost. And sometimes it may come with your life. And I think, to your point, David, I think it's important for those of us who are going to play in different roles, whether it's a periphery role, it's important for us to provide more support for those who are courageous enough to take those stands, because they don't have to fall and hit the ground when they get pushed down from the opposition and the powers that be. They could fall right into our arms as a community, and we can push them back up. But we've got to do a better job of not just letting people go out on their own. Imagine if the entire NFL, or at least all the Black NFL players, took a knee with Kaepernick. Said all of us will not play. All of us will not play. Not because we all would necessarily agree with everything Kaepernick said, but we disagree fundamentally with the fact that he doesn't have the right to do that. Right? Like, if that would have been transformative, right? But what happened was you had Eric Reed, a couple of players took a knee, you know, a couple other players are like, look, I got to get my money. And it's understandable. Like, we also shouldn't laugh at those players either, because ask how many of us in this room would be willing to risk our jobs and livelihood for standing up for social justice. I have 3 daughters in it. So if you're telling me, Joseph, Dr. Cooper, do this, and you can't provide for your 3 daughters, and I'm going to ask you, are you going to help pay for them in daycare? Are you going to help feed them? That's a big ask that you're asking for people, right? So that's why I want us to approach resistance from a communal, collectivist standpoint. It's a lot harder to economically gut a group of people. It's easy to do it to an individual. They could easily say, we're not going to pick up Kaepernick anymore. But if all the Black NFL players did, they can't replace all of them. Trust me, they cannot. There's a reason why they gave Deshaun Watson $230 million guaranteed. Deshaun Watson doesn't have to throw not one single touchdown for the Cleveland Browns. Legally, he's getting $230 million. There's a reason why they gave Patrick Mahomes $450 million 10-year contract. And if you think the NFL really cares about social justice causes, over the same 10-year period, they committed $250 million to social justice causes. If I were to tell you that in isolation, you're like, wow, that's a lot of money. But I just told you one NFL player is getting $450 million over the same time span. They gave almost half of what one player is getting to social justice causes over 10 years. But Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, right? And they didn't end race norming until a year after the George Floyd killing, which was a process during the combine where they would test the cognitive abilities of the Black athletes, and they automatically put it as lower. So when they retired with brain damage and they tried to file lawsuits, they could say, legally, we don't have to pay them because they were already less intelligent. So race norming is going on. Brian Flores, with his lawsuit, tells us that they have no interest in hiring Black coaches, and they are giving pennies to the dollar to social justice causes when they know they have. If you got $450 million to pay one player, you could definitely get more than 250 to social justice causes. So
I want to open it up for folks. I haven't just done. No, I mean we've chatted not y'all. Yes.
That has gone. Jackie Robinson and the general manager, Richie, has been considered by many to be the single most successful demonstration of racial equality in American history. And what they say is Jackie Robinson was silent about all the hate and when he had to walk through the crowds, but that has stood alone as one of the single most successful events. 1965, leading to your point, 21 Black players did not play in New Orleans. So I don't know if you remember this. They walked out, they said that we're not gonna do it. They ended up changing to Houston. Then there was another one involving Black cheerleaders, which put that up. 8 members of an all-Black cheerleading squad refused to stand for the anthem on March 8th of 1973. And what ended up happening is, I can't remember the school or that they played at, but the school ended up recognizing them, giving them all kinds of awards and accolades for bringing the attention. But I just wanted to bring that up to bring to the point some stats that I found that say and show that solidarity is the key.
Questions, I'm gonna throw it out there for folks, if I could ask questions all night.
Yeah, we can see that.
You saw the one on there.
And so I'll get that one at Jean.
Thank you. Great. I have a question. You touched a little on it. You talked some about like sort of the respectability politics and like the professionalism, right, aspects and stuff. And my question is, knowing how difficult it is, especially for Black and brown athletes, to sort of change that for themselves at their own cost. What can those of us that have different types of positions or want to be allies, are there things that we can do to help to change that perception? Or to help them when things happen?
So I think one of the things is, first of all, just to recognize their lived experiences and where they're coming from. So like in some cases, it may be just that the student has never, or the athlete as a student, but just has never been in front of a camera, right? And so recognizing that, then I think taking the time to kind of do the media relations training. And so it's not like journalists want to put you in a box and have you answer questions this way. I just think it's all a matter of not adding to the stereotype that people already have. So like that thug mentality, right? So I've seen some athletes that they've had the bandana on and the shades and, you know, like they want to do all the contemporary, but what a lot of times we don't realize is you're adding and supporting stereotypes that people get from the media, right? So if there's nobody there to kind of help them understand, what you're doing is just feeding that. And so that's the other question I think we have to remember is people forget that when you enter into mass media, it's no longer just your personal choice, right? So I may hate it that I have to not say this or not act this way in front of the camera, but I have to remember that when I go in front of that camera, I have to make sure that I'm presenting a right image of the professional Black woman with a degree or whatever. I can tell you that I struggle at the beginning of my career with all white students. And then so what got me on this was, why am I doing this? Oh, they watch a lot of MTV. You know, Love, Sex and Magic, Justin Timberlake and Sierra. She had on that animal print, and Jean Kilburn says that Black women and Hispanic women are oftentimes very sexualized and appear in animalistic clothing. And so if I am the first professional African-American woman who buys mostly hip hop music? White, upper, right? So if they have this image, then I'm a conflict. I'm challenging that notion. What do they usually do? Social psychology will predict they're going to disrespect me, right? Or they wanted to, they didn't. But my point is, I think one of the things we have to do is, you know, kind of see where the student's coming from. So like a lot of those disrespectful emails I would get, I'd have the student come in and read them to my face, right? So if you know, there were several of these young boys that would just start crying, right? Because they forgot, like in this generation too, we have to keep in mind, they forget there's a human on the other side of that. And we can see that a lot in social media where people are just saying whatever they want on your Facebook page. And I'm like, delete, delete, because, you know, there's a human being on that other side that you have to take that time. So I would say it's just a matter of finding out where they're coming from and what they, you know, need to know, and then seeing if they're wanting to learn more, you know, do they want to know how to be better or present a better image? And unfortunately, we do have a black tax, you know, like we do have to kind of be better, work harder. But I don't mind doing that as long as I'm moving the needle forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'll add a little bit. To me, that question is very important in terms of how to be an effective ally. I think to me, particularly for really any group that is outside of a particular oppressed group, the best thing you can do is do the work within your own families and within your own friends and networks. So there's a number of things that whether Michael Jordan, Colin Kaepernick, Muhammad Ali, Serena Williams, there's a large contingency of folks that are not going to hear them or listen to them, period, just because they don't want to hear whatever it is that they say. But they will listen to you, right? Because you grew up with them, you go to school with them, you may, you know, you have relationships with them. So I would say having those courageous conversations with people of your same background too, because typically people are more open to change through relationships. The other thing that I think is really, really important is to not assume that everybody who is Black, who's in a position, don't assume their political view. And what I mean by that is everybody doesn't want to advocate for social justice, right? Like, but that doesn't mean that they don't. And it's not for you to judge them or for me to judge them either, right? It's this idea that if a Black person gets into a position like President Obama, right? Everybody expected him to just do all kinds of stuff. He did a lot of positive and progressive things. He was limited in a lot of ways. And in other ways, he was true to who he was, which, you know, he's African-American, but he's also biracial, right? I mean, he grew up in a white family in Kansas and his father's from Kenya and he grew up in Hawaii and Indonesia. That's not the same thing as a young Black child growing up in Chicago or growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, right? So a part of the dynamics is that we homogenize Black people in the African diaspora in very problematic ways. People have different views about what change really should look like. And there's different ways to do it. I don't think it's just one way to do it. We shouldn't always say the more radical way is the better way. And so I talk to my activist friends a lot about that. It's just because you're more of an activist, but doesn't necessarily mean that's the better way to do it, because at some point we're all going to have to be in the same room together. Like this world isn't to where we're all going to have our separate enclaves. Like, so if you're constantly calling people names or antagonizing, that's not going to bode well for at some point we're going to have to do some healing work. At the same time, my friends that are less radical or more kind of passive, we can't always avoid the difficult conversation. At some point, we got to say, no, there does need to be more money go to this group. And it's because this group has been unjustly harmed for years for that. And we're okay with that. Like, it doesn't mean that it's unfair. What's unfair is for us to act like we can withhold resources, deprive and extract a group for centuries on end, and then later just say, hey, let's just call everybody minorities and it'll all be better. Like that's not fair. So I think the best way you can be an ally is within your own group and connecting with people in different leadership roles. So there are going to be people who are in high level leadership roles within certain organizations. They're going to be grassroots leaders, and talk to them about what are the best ways I can support your efforts as it relates to this common goal that we have, whatever that may be.
I got some questions in the chat. I'm going to get to. So one question is, I think you might have already gotten it though, is what advice would you give someone who works with a lot of current student athletes who struggle finding their voice with all the pressures put on them from various stakeholders? Basically, this notion of authentic voice, athletes responding to various stakeholders in that regard.
Well, you know, I think at Oklahoma, I'm not doing it with just athletes, but when I told you about they're allowing me to have this affinity lounge where students can come in and ask tough questions. And, you know, I can't say I've seen success because I just started it last semester, but I think from what I've noticed, every person, like I said, has different lived experiences. And for me, the challenge part is listening, right? And so, and listening to people from different ones, because not all Blacks fit in the same box. But we also have to remember, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, you think you're white or you're Uncle Tom. So, I don't know if you knew, during the protest, I went on CNN and I was all that stuff. And there was it was going all over the Facebook, and Carl Kinney, who is a massive, great friend and reporter, he had to shut it down. But there were people that said I was the highest paid Uncle Tom at the University of Missouri. We're speaking my truth, right? And so I'm saying, like, that's the other thing, that you have to teach them how to stand strong when some of those comments are coming from your own, right? Like, that was probably the most hurtful time, right? So I think, when we're talking about meeting the students where they are and working with them, first, we just need to listen to what some of their experiences have been like. And for me right now, I can relate to most of them because I've lived that, like being told, you speak too proper, you think you're white. How can I think I'm white? I look, and so I think it gets to the point where within the Black community, we have to accept the diversity within our own group. That, we don't all speak Ebonics, we don't all like hip hop, you know what I mean? And so I think that's why I say you have to meet with each student and learn their own thing. And I'm working on that. So look for that paper to come out on how.
I've got a couple of just easy suggestions. One, there's a summit called the Black Student Athlete Summit. I think this year is at the University of Southern California. You can Google it. It originated at the University of Texas at Austin, and they've had it annually since 2015. It's a great summit where a collection of stakeholders, current student athletes, former athletes, legal professionals, finance professionals, academicians like myself come and we talk. So I think that's a great resource for them to find themselves. Another one is connecting them with students who are non-athletes who are engaging in ways of effectively expressing themselves. Sometimes we forget student athletes are students too. And so help have them be a part of a spoken word poetry group. Have them go and talk with some of the members who are part of fraternities and sororities. Have them go and meet with other people, because these other students are finding their voice, whether it's through the campus media, whether it's through social media. And so that could also help them. A part of our problem in society is that we exceptionalize athletes as if they're a different type of like human being or something. Like, like they don't need the same things that every other college student needs, right? They need mental health support. They need career guidance support. They need love. They need the freedom to express and make mistakes and grow from it. There's another group, a couple of former student athletes. I would definitely encourage them to watch The Pivot. I think that's a great former players, Ryan Clark, Fred Taylor. It's a YouTube channel that they have that's really helpful and that could help you find your voice. There's another one called Status, STATUS. I know it's on Facebook, but it's some former student athletes. And I think it's called like Former Student Athletes Achieving Universal Success. And they're really talking about how after their athletic careers, how they had identity crises and how they found themselves. And so a part of current student athletes finding their voice is surrounding themselves with people who understand what they're going through and how they can amplify it. There's another podcast called Burn It All Down. It's a group of women who do it, which is really great. And then I would just say, as you all have been introduced to us and some of our colleagues, connect them with us and connect them with some of the work that we do. I mean, you can Google our information. It's out there. There's a lot of great resources out there about athletes, about how to find your voice and how to do it in a way that's authentic to you. Because everybody doesn't have to do it in the same way, right? You being your authentic self, it's the cliche says, don't try to be anyone else because everyone else is taken. Be you, be you, be you. There's only one you that's ever been created. So you may not take a knee or raise a fist. You may not do, but you can do something that's equally, if not more, impactful, right? You could have a conversation with a teammate about something that is very difficult. You could help fundraise or donate to a cause. You could join an organization. Like, you don't always have to do the thing that gets the most views, that goes viral, that has the big splash. It's the little things that are going to help change our society. It's those things that are within your control. It's not always this big, grandiose thing. It's just doing what's authentic to you. And if you surround yourself with other people who are doing progressive things, it's going to help you amplify your voice. And together, as you mentioned, the collective voice is going to go even louder than anything one individual can do.
Mike?
First, thank you so much, Dr. Frisby and Dr. Cook. This is a fascinating conversation, and I wish I forced one of my classes to come to me.
Next time.
Yeah, that's Tuesday, unfortunately. So, there are a lot of kind of pathways that are interesting to me. So, like one, and this could be for after. I want to hear what you think about the Rihanna book cover with ASAP Rocky. So we could like.
Oh, yeah.
But it's striking to me as a scholar, but also as like a social commentator, somebody who's forced to watch like much more like the ways that racism manifests itself across a lot of different fields. And you guys spoke a lot specifically about the media. And one of my concerns now are twofold, and I'd love to. So one is we're watching a lot of the advances that civil rights fighters have made be rolled back extensively and like strategically through the courts. DeSantis has this whole anti-woke agenda. And he defined woke as the belief that systemic injustices exist. And people are buying in because they're not, the frame is so powerful. Anti-woke is the frame that they don't know what's behind it.
Right.
They're not paying attention to that third stanza.
Nope.
That's separate from this idea that I think you guys are also grappling with this tension. I want to hear you talk about it a little bit more. There's this conflict between individualism and intersectionality right now. And I feel like intersectionality is being used as a tool of division because again, it's not about power and privilege. It's just about, this is my sexual orientation, this is my race, this is my gender. And so with the amplification of the internet and all these different media sources that people can go to, there's so many different echo chambers. Nobody has to deal with the cognitive dissonance that actually creates the opportunities for change. So I'm wondering, where do you start? Like, where do you start kind of unplugging people from the matrix? Like, what of the different forms of activism that you spoke about, like, where do we start and how do we make sure that they're not continuing to reinforce each other? Because like, we can't do media and protest and, and it strikes me that we don't necessarily have the leaders in each one of those spaces that you were referring to kind of in previous iterations. So like, where do we start, not only in terms of helping our students uncover and critically interrogate the messages that they're being given about race, racism, race relations, but also like intersectionality as a conceptual idea from Black feminist thought. Like one of the core ideas in it is coalition, and we've lost that idea. So like, how do we get people back toward that? Like,
I could start. The first part of your question, 75 million people voted for President Trump, 75 million. So, former President Trump. And not all of them were white. So the first part that I want to say is that the anti-woke thing that DeSantis is saying, like, there's a large contingency of people who belong to the same country that we do who feel that strongly. So one, there's a real opposition to what we're talking about. Like, everybody doesn't agree that Black Lives Matter. Everybody doesn't agree that, we should talk about African-American history. So we've got to acknowledge that that's a reality. Like, we don't live in a consensus society, like where we all agree on this. So we don't. Everybody doesn't have a problem with the mass incarceration and complex that's killing African-Americans. Everybody doesn't have a problem with what happened to George Floyd. If he would have just complied, it wouldn't have happened, right? That's the response. So I think the part about how do we there are some people you're not going to get to be on the same page. So you got to be okay with that. You got to find the people who you can come to reasonable agreement with. And to answer your second part of your question, where do we start? Any place you start is the right place to start. Like, I think we're overthinking we shouldn't do the bit. I think, one, we should all do the proper education, kind of like the adage, know thyself. The same Kofa Bird says, in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you've been. I honestly think we've got to do a thorough investigation of whatever topics we're discussing to better understand what happened then and how can we improve on it. A lot of it, we don't know enough about our history to understand like what were the pitfalls, because everything that happened before, it wasn't a flawed approach. It just got stifled and we didn't continue it. The individualism and the intersectionality, I know it's going to sound cliche, but we just got to lead with love. Like, a lot of it is an oppression Olympics. Like, if Black males say, hey, we're being killed, Black women, well, it's about it. But we're a community, right? So like, we shouldn't be, the tribalism has been kind of the root of a lot of our dysfunction in a lot of ways. And I think we just got to lead with love. We got to say, hey, let's learn from each other. Let's work together. Let's identify our common goals and let's move towards that. I think as she mentioned earlier, we have kind of bought into a lot of the own stereotypes about our own people. We perpetuate it in a lot of harmful ways. We communicate with each other in a lot of harmful ways. I think working together should not be that difficult. I think we make it harder. I think sometimes we don't know how to just disagree and still work together, right? It's like, if you don't agree with me on everything, right? So if you don't agree with me on abortion, same-sex marriage, this, we can't be, it's like, but can we work together on this though? Like, I mean, because we have different backgrounds. I may not agree with you on all of that, but we can work together on this. So I think a part of it is kind of finding the commonalities. To your point, we emphasize our differences way too much, right? Yeah, we may differ on some of these things, but where do we agree? The individualism, the reason why there's so much of that is because society rewards it. You got a teenager who can go viral and make more money than all of us in this room by just putting a camera, looking at themselves and doing, how narcissistic is that? But if I told you it's going to help provide you and your children intergenerational wealth, I bet you'll be doing the two-step in front of the camera too. Right? So we got a society that is rewarding individualism. It's rewarding that. Even in sports, we reward individual athletes. When we talk about Michael Jordan, what do we always say? 6 rings. You would think he played 1 on 5. Yeah. It was a team sport. He didn't just get them 6 rings. So everything about our society is about the individual. We've got to push back on that. So I just think we got to lead with love. We got to be strategic about maximizing the talents of everybody in our community. Don't expect everybody to do the same thing. Find common ground. And just we gotta think and reflect, but we gotta do the work too. Like, we can't just be so stifled that we just don't do anything. We can start with voting registration, something like that. Let's get people registered to vote, right? Let's talk about our local politics. Let's get people to serve on the PTA, right? Let's make sure that we're increasing representation in these areas. Let's create our organizations, because we're really good at criticizing systems. We're less effective at creating ones that are better. Right? We always say, oh, well, that person didn't do it, or they didn't do that. Okay, what are you doing though? Like, what are you doing? Did you create a transformative program for young Black boys in Columbia, Missouri? Right? Like, it's a very hard thing to do to address like systemic issues that have been going on for centuries. So I think we got to give ourselves grace in that everything we do matters. You know, it may not lead to the transformative change at that moment that we want it, but we got to keep with it. We got to do radical self-care, because a lot of times we burn ourselves out. You know, it's a lot. I think Tamika Mallory talked about it. She was very active in the Black Lives Matter movement. She talked about she got death threats, how she was in a bad mental space for a long time. So I think all of that is a part of the solution. And back to the first point I said, everybody's not going to want us to win. Like, there's a reason why these groups, like certain networks, are very popular. Like, this is the part, the woke issue that I have. Everybody isn't miseducated or confused. Some people just don't want us to do well. Some people just don't want to see us succeed. Some people want us to go back to slavery. So you can give them bell hooks, you can give them Carter G. Woodson, you can educate them till the roosters crow in the morning, and they're still going to be like, I think you're less than I am. And we've got to be understanding that there's always going to be people who feel that way. Like, this notion that we're going to just have this utopia where nobody is trying to cause us harm, nobody is trying to disenfranchise us, that's just not going to happen. So get comfortable with the fight, get comfortable with the struggle, and know that, hey, what I'm doing will benefit the next generation. Because we all wouldn't be sitting in this room right now if we didn't have ancestors. And I'm talking about of all racial groups in this room, because it wasn't just Black people who were fighting for abolition. It was multiple groups. And I would argue the white allies played even a very significant role in it, right? Because you had to convince enough white people that Black people shouldn't be enslaved in order for it to happen. So it's not just about us, it's about everybody leveraging their influence. Back to your question, those of you who don't identify, what conversations are you having with your family members who may harbor some anti-Black views, right? What conversations are you having with your community members who are harboring those views? So it's a lot of work, it's hard to do, but the formula to me is not complicated. The execution is what's been our challenge.
So as a,
Can I get, answer him on activity?
we are over time. I'm sorry, I can't. Too bad.
One suggestion I would have is that you teach them the 5 media literacy questions. So every time you're watching something, you're very critical. You're like, what do I see? What are the images? So use that activity. The second activity that I do a lot and I see success with, especially when you were asking, how do you tell them which one to go with, is you have students write down 5 amazing things about themselves. And usually you can tell my social psychology background, but the first 3 are at their core. And so usually the things that I get upset about, it's because they're attacking the core. So like if I want to be known as a great grandmother, a great scholar or whatever, if somebody gives me a bad review on one of my studies, that's going to tick me off. I was going to say a bad word. That's going to. So I use that to explain, like I'll have white students that will ask, why do some Blacks use the N word, and why do others get upset? It depends your core. Like, do I really identify with that? So that's a really great exercise in and of itself. And then I want to end with this, and I promise I'll be quiet. But has anybody ever heard of the boiling crab syndrome?
Yes.
That's used to describe African Americans primarily. And so I just wanted to leave with that because I think that's another thing that I'm noticing that I'm having to deprogram in a lot of our students but if you think about it, and I'll have you think about this, shows like Real Housewives of Atlanta do not help us deprogram the students that Black are fighting against each other, right? Because you have lots of two-faced things going on. And how many shows do we see where there are Black women that actually empower other Black people? What are our young women learning about friendship? Okay, I'm done.
Look, I'm an educator. I'm very, for me to shut off conversation would be really difficult. But
Yeah, this
demands that I have to shut off conversation, if not me. I want to thank our speakers for coming here and talking about an incredibly important topic, particularly in the context of Black History Month, with the theme being this year is Black resistance, and what does that mean? And I think it's really complex. And I think what we got from this is that it's not as simple as people like to think it is, and resistance can come in a whole host of forms, right? And a whole lot of things that have to happen in order to move resistance to representation to actually real change. And I think, and how are we represented in that context? And whose voices are we hearing authentic? So please join me in thanking our speakers.